"Are you going to beat my mama too?" "She's dying," said the twins, unaware a lonely rancher would heal their wounds. The road was dry as old bone, rutted with wagon scars and scattered with the pale husks of last year's weeds. A thin spring wind swept low, carrying the faint sweetness of new blossoms from far-off fields, but it only sharpened the ache of hunger in the bellies of the two children trudging along its edge. Their feet were bare, soles toughened by months of walking, though every stone and thorn left its mark. The girl, Julie May, 8 years old, wore a calico dress once blue but now faded to the gray of rain-worn slate. She carried a bundle no larger than a flour sack, tied with frayed twine, holding all that remained of their home. At her side walked her twin brother Gerard, narrower of shoulder but sharp-eyed, a boy whose silence carried more weight than words. His trousers hung loose, cinched with rope, and his hair, once carefully parted by his mother's hand, stuck up in wild tufts from wind and dust. Beside them padded Patch, their mongrel dog, ribs showing beneath a patchwork coat of brown and white. He nosed at the ground, ears twitching at every rustle in the grass, yet never strayed far from the children's steps. His loyalty was their only certainty, the one constant since the day the world had turned against them. Their mother walked a few paces behind, stumbling more than striding. Mary Hensley had seen only 29 years, yet grief and sickness had bent her spine and hollowed her cheeks till she looked older than her own late husband's mother. Her bonnet shaded a face pale as parchment, and her cough, raw and ragged, tore at the air every few steps. She clutched her shawl around her shoulders, though the day was warm, as if some unseen chill gnawed at her bones. It was Julie May who broke the silence, her voice thin but steady. "Mama, we're almost there." Mary tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "Almost where, child?" "The earth don't end. To a child, hope needs no map." Julie lifted her chin toward the horizon where a lone cottonwood tree marked a bend in the road. Beyond it, a rise of land held the faint outline of a ranch, fences stretching like weary arms, a weathered barn leaning into the wind, and a cabin crouched low against the prairie's sweep. Smoke did not rise from its chimney. To Julie, it looked like a place where a man might share bread, where her mother might lay her head without fear. Gerard said nothing, only tightened his grip on the stick he carried, stripped of bark and worn smooth by nervous fingers. He had learned early that words did little against cruelty. Since their father's death in a mine collapse the previous winter, their mother's kin had turned from kinship to scorn. They had called Mary cursed, a bringer of ruin. When she pleaded for shelter, they offered blows. When she begged mercy, they gave shame. One uncle had struck her so hard she fell against the hearthstones, blood bright on her lip. That night she gathered the twins and slipped into the dark with only what she could carry. Weeks had blurred into miles. Barn lofts, ditches, church steps, the charity of strangers, each place a stop along their slow descent. But sickness had caught Mary as surely as a snare, and each day her cough deepened until Julie whispered the words that had become their refrain. "Are you going to beat my mama too?" "She's dying." Now the ranch lay before them, solemn and silent under the spring sky. The children hesitated at the fence line, uncertain if the man who lived there was merciful or cruel. Mary faltered, pressing a hand to her chest. Her knees buckled, and she sank into the dust, the bundle slipping from her grasp. Patch whined, circling her, his tail low. Julie dropped beside her mother, panic rising. "Mama, please, not here." Gerard looked toward the cabin. A figure stood at the porch, tall and broad-shouldered, hat pulled low against the sun. He was motionless, carved from the same weathered timber as the posts behind him. His name, though they did not yet know it, was Samuel Harper. 34 years had carved lines into his face deeper than his age deserved. He had buried his wife 6 springs past, the grave a quiet mound at the edge of his land. Since then, words had left him, laughter forgotten, leaving only silence and work. The town called him a loner, a man bound more to cattle and earth than to people. Now his eyes fixed on the sight before him, a woman crumpled in the dust, children clinging like roots to a fallen tree, and a dog baring teeth at the stranger's stillness. His first thought was of trouble. His second was of memory, the memory of his own wife gasping in childbirth, his hands useless as death crept into their cabin. That memory made him retreat deeper into himself. Yet the sound that came next was not memory but present, Julie's trembling voice cutting through the wind. "Sir," she whispered, lifting her face streaked with dust and tears. "Please don't hurt her. She's all we got." Her words struck him harder than any bullet. He saw himself in their eyes, the loneliness, the fear of another blow. Samuel's throat tightened. Still he did not move, as if the decision must be weighed on some hidden scale. Mary tried to rise, but her body gave way. A fresh cough rattled her lungs, crimson spotting her kerchief. The children cried out together, a sound of despair too old for their young voices. Samuel stepped off the porch at last. His boots stirred dust as he crossed the yard, every step heavy with the weight of choice. Patch growled, but Julie hushed him with a trembling hand. The rancher stopped over Mary's fallen form, shadow falling across her face. She lifted her eyes to him, gray as storm clouds, filled with both plea and pride. Her voice was broken, but her words carried the strength of a woman refusing to beg. "We'll move on if you send us, sir. Just let the children rest a while." Samuel's jaw worked, but no words came. Instead, he bent and slid his arms beneath her slight frame. She weighed no more than a bundle of sticks, fragile and burning with fever. For a moment she stiffened, fearing the strike that so often followed a man's touch. But Samuel only gathered her carefully, as one might lift a wounded bird. Julie gasped, relief mingled with fear. Gerard's eyes narrowed, studying every twitch of the man's face, seeking truth or cruelty. Patch whined and trotted at his heels. The rancher carried Mary toward the cabin. Inside, the air smelled of pine and ash. The room was sparse: wood table, iron stove, a cot pushed against the wall. Samuel laid her down gently, her breath rattling in her chest. Julie rushed to her side, clutching her mother's hand, whispering promises that all would be well. Gerard lingered near the doorway, watching the man with suspicion. Samuel fetched water from a basin, pressing the cup to Mary's lips. She sipped weakly, eyes closing. Then the cough shook her again, racking her thin body. Julie's tears fell on the quilt. "Please," Julie whispered, her voice so soft it seemed more prayer than plea. "Don't let my mama die." Samuel's hand paused on the cup. He turned his gaze to the children, then to the dog curled at their feet. He felt the silence of the cabin press against him, not the comfortable silence he had known for years, but one filled with need and fear and the fragile hope of strangers. His heart, long dormant, stirred painfully. Yet outside, beyond the fences, lay a town ready to whisper. He could already hear the voices of Martha Caldwell, who carried gossip like seed on the wind, and Sheriff Briggs, who warned against burdens not your own. To take them in would be to invite judgment, risk, perhaps even ruin. He stood at the threshold of choice, staring at the woman's hollowed face, the children's pleading eyes, the dog's silent watch. His breath came slow, steady as a prayer he did not know how to finish. And then, as the twilight deepened, Samuel Harper made no sound but moved his chair close to the cot. He sat, elbows on knees, head bowed, as if bracing himself for a storm that had already entered his house. The twins exchanged a look. For the first time in weeks, Julie allowed herself to hope. Gerard, though wary, felt his grip on the stick loosen. Patch rested his muzzle on his paws, sighing. Mary stirred, her eyes fluttering open to the sight of the man beside her, silent as stone but present as earth. She tried to speak, but only a whisper came. "Are you going to beat me too?" Her voice broke into a cough before the answer could come. And in that pause, the cabin seemed to hold its breath, balanced between mercy and rejection, between salvation and another wound. The cabin walls breathed with a hush of wind through chinks and the steady crackle of a fire Samuel had kindled low in the iron stove. Its warmth did little to banish the tension that hung thick in the room. The children sat on the rough plank floor, their backs against the cot where Mary lay, their small bodies curved protectively around her as though they were shields of flesh and bone. Patch dozed at their feet, his ears twitching at every unfamiliar creak, never fully at rest. Samuel Harper sat opposite, silent as a carving of oak, his hat resting on his knee. The lamplight threw his shadow across the wall, stretching long and distorted. He studied the woman on the cot, her face pallid, her lips cracked, and each shallow breath a reminder of the fragility he had allowed into his home. He had sworn years ago never to let another soul depend on him. Yet here they were, fragile as dandelion fluff and just as easily scattered by the wind. Mary stirred, her lashes fluttering open. For a moment she looked startled, as though waking in a stranger's house would invite danger. But Julie's small hand tightened around hers, and recognition softened the fear. She tried to sit, but Samuel leaned forward, his voice low and rough from disuse. "Rest." The word came out more command than comfort, but she obeyed, sinking back with a faint nod. The twins watched him warily. Gerard, ever the sentinel, clutched his stick across his knees, eyes fixed on the rancher's every movement. Julie studied him differently, curious, measuring the man behind the silence. When Mary's cough broke the stillness, Samuel poured water from the tin pitcher, handing the cup to Julie to give to her mother. His hands were calloused, fingers scarred, yet the way he passed the cup was careful, steady, almost gentle. Julie noticed. Gerard noticed too, though he pretended not to. The fire spit sparks, and Samuel rose to add another log. His movements filled the small room, broad shoulders, sure steps. The children drew closer to their mother as though his shadow might swallow them. He felt it, that fear, and it settled heavy in his chest. He broke bread, coarse and dark, and set it on the table with a crock of milk. "Eat." His voice rumbled like distant thunder. Julie's eyes flicked to Gerard. The boy hesitated, but Mary gave a faint nod. "Go on, children." They crept forward, perching on the edge of the bench, eating with the cautious speed of those who did not trust plenty. Samuel watched them, expression unreadable, though his mind circled memories of his wife once setting bread before him in the same kitchen, her hands deft, her laughter and music now buried in silence. When the children finished, Julie whispered a thank you. Samuel inclined his head, a gesture stiff but sincere. Gerard said nothing, though crumbs clung to his chin. Patch licked them away, making the boy crack the faintest smile before he remembered to frown again. Outside, twilight deepened. The prairie shifted from gold to indigo, and coyotes yipped far off. Samuel lit a second lamp, its glow softening the hard lines of the room. Mary watched him, her voice a rasp. "We'll not trouble you long. When I'm stronger, we'll move on." Samuel turned, meeting her gaze. The words rose in him. "You won't be strong soon, not without rest, not without care," but he swallowed them, offering only silence. Her dignity was a fragile thing, and he would not break it. Later, when Mary drifted to uneasy sleep, the children curled beside her. Samuel remained at the table, mending a strap with needle and twine. His hands were steady, his breath even, yet his thoughts unsettled. He had lived years with only cattle for company, his world reduced to weather and work. Now each creak of the cot, each sigh of a child, stirred something he had buried with his wife. The next morning broke bright and brisk, sunlight spilling through the small window. Julie woke first, smoothing her mother's hair back with careful fingers. Gerard slipped outside, Patch at his heels, to stare at the corral where a sorrel horse tossed its head against the wind. Samuel found him there, leaning on the fence. Gerard tightened his grip on the stick as Samuel approached. "You can feed him," the rancher said. He held out a handful of hay. The boy hesitated, suspicion clouding his eyes, but Patch nudged him forward. Gerard stretched his small hand, the horse's warm breath blowing against his skin. A rare smile broke across the boy's face, quick as dawn. Samuel said nothing, but something in his chest eased. Julie helped sweep the floor, her bare feet whispering against the boards. Samuel fetched her an old pair of shoes from a trunk, his wife's things long packed away. They were too large, but Julie's eyes shone as she slipped them on. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded once, unable to answer. Mary tried to rise, insisting she could tend the cooking. Her knees wavered, and Samuel caught her elbow before she fell. Her pride bristled, but his grip was steady, not domineering. His voice left no room for argument, though it carried no cruelty. She sat, cheeks flushed with both fever and frustration, and folded her hands to still their trembling. The town learned quickly. Martha Caldwell arrived one afternoon, shawl pulled tight, eyes sharp with curiosity. She lingered at the door, her words wrapped in feigned concern. Folks are talking, Samuel. A woman and children under your roof. You know what they'll say. Samuel's jaw set, but Mary spoke first, her voice steady despite her weakness. Let them say what they will. I've no shame in needing shelter. Martha's gaze flicked between them, calculating, then softened with something like pity. She left with her basket empty but her tongue full for the town. Sheriff Briggs came not long after, his boots heavy on the porch. He looked over the children, his eyes hard but not unkind. This ain't a charity house, Harper. You take on trouble, it'll drag you under. Send them to town. We'll see what can be done. Samuel's silence was iron. The sheriff studied him, waiting for a cent that never came. Finally he tipped his hat and left, muttering that stubbornness had killed better men. The children sensed the storm beneath these visits. Julie asked Samuel one evening, her small voice trembling, "Are you going to send us away?" His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw the sorrow behind them, vast as the prairie. No. The word was simple, solid as stone. She leaned against him then, brief but trusting, and he let her stay. Nights grew gentler in rhythm. Gerard followed Samuel to the barn, watching him mend harness, set fence posts, tend cattle. The boy spoke little, but his eyes soaked in every motion. Julie hummed soft lullabies to Patch while she swept or stirred broth. Mary stitched the tear in Samuel's shirt one quiet afternoon, her fingers clumsy from weakness, but her expression serene as though the small act restored some dignity long denied her. Still, the sickness clung. Each night, when coughing racked her frame, the children held her hands and prayed. Samuel listened from his chair, the sound carving him hollow. He rose more than once to fetch cool water, pressing the cup to her lips when her strength failed. She would meet his eyes over the rim, gratitude unspoken yet clear. Spring thickened. The grass greened, wildflowers painted the hills. Yet shadows lingered. Mary's fever did not break, only ebbed and flowed like a tide. The children lived between joy of small kindness and dread of loss. One evening, thunder rolled low on the horizon. Samuel sat by the window, mending tack, while Mary rested on the cot. Julie whispered a hymn to her mother, her voice trembling but sweet. Gerard sat stiff beside them, his stick across his knees. Suddenly Mary coughed, deeper than before, and a spatter of blood darkened the cloth at her lips. Julie cried out, clutching her arm. Gerard leapt up, fear breaking his mask. Patch barked sharply, circling. Samuel rose in 2 strides, kneeling at her side. Mary's face was ashen, her breath ragged. Her eyes found his, full of terror and apology. "Don't let them see me go," Julie sobbed, burying her face against her mother. Gerard gripped Samuel's sleeve, desperation cracking through his guarded silence. "Please, don't let her die." The storm outside broke with a crash of lightning, the cabin filled with the sharp scent of rain. Samuel's hand hovered over Mary's trembling form, his silence thundering louder than the storm. And in that moment, with the children's pleas echoing like prayers, he felt the weight of a choice that could no longer be delayed. The storm had passed in the night, leaving the prairie rinsed clean, every blade of grass heavy with drops that glittered in the morning sun. The cabin smelled of damp earth and smoke, the scent of rain drifting through the open door. Mary stirred on the cot, her face pale, her lips cracked, but she was still breathing. Julie slept curled at her mother's side, her small hand clasping the edge of the quilt, while Gerard sat upright against the wall, eyes red from a night without sleep. Patch lay across his legs like a sentinel, his ears twitching even in dreams. Samuel Harper sat at the table, his head bowed in exhaustion, hands clasped before him. He had not slept either. He had spent the long night stoking the fire, wiping Mary's brow with cool cloths, listening to every rasp of her lungs. He had thought once more he would lose someone to sickness while helpless to stop it. But the morning had come, and Mary's chest still rose and fell. Relief crept through him like warmth returning to frozen limbs. The children woke slowly. Julie blinked, rubbed her eyes, and smiled faintly when she saw her mother's chest moving steadily. Gerard leaned forward, touching Mary's wrist, reassured by the pulse he felt there. Samuel stood, stretching his stiff limbs, and spoke in a voice rough but steady. She'll hold, if we're careful. The words settled over the room like a fragile blessing. Julie's face lit with gratitude, while Gerard only nodded, but the set of his jaw softened. For the first time since arriving, the boy looked at Samuel without suspicion sharpened like a blade. Later that day, Samuel saddled his horse and rode into town. The road was soft with mud, puddles shining like mirrors. He rode not for himself but for them, though he told no one. At the apothecary, old Doc Henry Whitlow eyed him with surprise. "You don't often come down for more than nails or salt, Harper." Samuel grunted. "Need something for fever. Woman near on death with it." The doctor leaned on his counter, eyes narrowing. "That widow and her young ones, I heard. You've taken them in?" Samuel's silence was answer enough. Doc Whitlow nodded slowly, gathering herbs, powders, and a tincture that smelled of sharp roots. "Keep her warm, keep her still. She's frail, but I've seen worse recover." On the way out of town, Samuel passed Martha Caldwell, who clutched her shawl tighter when she saw him. She called across the street, her voice pitched high for others to hear. "You'll ruin yourself, Samuel Harper. Folks will talk you into shame before you know it." He did not answer. He only rode on, the reins easy in his hands, his eyes set on the horizon where his cabin waited. Back home, Julie met him at the gate, her eyes wide. "Did you bring something to help Mama?" He handed her the bundle of herbs, crouching so his face met hers. "These'll help. She must rest." Her small fingers brushed his rough ones, and in that fleeting touch she felt steadiness, the kind of anchor a child clings to. The days that followed unfolded with slow rhythm, each one a step along the edge of hope. Samuel prepared broth, coaxing Mary to sip when she was able. Julie read psalms softly at her mother's side, her voice steady even when tears threatened. Gerard worked in the barn with Samuel, fetching tools, holding nails, learning by silent observation. The boy's mistrust did not vanish overnight, but each day it lessened, worn down by the man's constancy. Mary grew stronger in increments so small they seemed like miracles. She managed to sit up one morning, leaning on pillows while sunlight streamed across her face. Samuel watched her from the table, silent, but his eyes softened with something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. She caught his gaze and whispered, "Thank you." He looked away, muttering, anyone would have done the same. But she knew better. She had begged mercy before and found none. This man's quiet care was no common thing. Word spread through the town that Samuel Harper had a widow and children under his roof. Some wagged tongues in condemnation, others shook their heads in pity, but a few saw what Martha and the sheriff could not. Old Mrs. Alder, who once lost 2 sons to fever, stopped by with a loaf of bread, leaving it on the porch without a word. A drifter who had worked Samuel's fence the year prior offered to trade hay cheap, saying every child deserved a chance. Yet the louder voices were those who whispered shame, and Mary felt the sting even within the safety of the cabin. One afternoon she tried to rise and sweep, determined not to be a burden. Samuel found her clinging to the broom, her breath ragged, her knees trembling. He took the handle gently from her hands. "You'll undo what's been mended." She bristled, pride rising. "I can't lie helpless forever." His voice lowered, but the firmness in it was undeniable. "You're not helpless. You're alive. That's the work now." Something in his tone silenced her. She sank back, tears stinging her eyes, not from shame but from the startling truth of his words. Julie began to hum again, songs her mother once sang in brighter days. Her small voice filled the cabin with sweetness, lifting even Samuel's silence. Gerard grew bolder, asking questions in short bursts: how to mend harness, how to set a post true, how to quiet a skittish horse. Samuel answered with patience, showing rather than telling, until the boy's suspicion gave way to something like respect. One evening, when the sky burned with the crimson of sunset, Julie approached Samuel by the corral. She held the ribbon he had bought her in town, its color a soft lavender. She tilted her head, studying him with solemn eyes. "Will you be our papa now?" The words struck him like thunder. He knelt slowly, his rough hands resting on his knees. "Child, I'll always protect you. But your mama's heart, that's hers to give." Julie nodded, though her lip trembled. She tucked the ribbon into her hair, and for the first time she looked less like a child running from hunger and more like a girl beginning to dream again. Mary overheard, her heart tightening at the gentleness hidden in Samuel's words. She turned her face from the window, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She had been cast out, beaten, left to die, yet here was a man who saw her not as burden but as something worth guarding. But shadows still lingered. Her late husband's kin, the Hensleys, had heard whispers of her refuge. One gray morning they rode up the road, 3 men with hard eyes and bitter mouths. They reined in at the fence, calling for her to come out. Samuel stepped onto the porch, rifle resting across his arm, his stance calm but unyielding. The eldest Hensley spat into the dirt. "She's ours to reckon with, Harper. That woman carries shame, and those brats too. Hand them over." Samuel's gaze did not waver. "They're not yours, nor your shame to claim." The men bristled, shifting in their saddles. Sheriff Briggs rode up moments later, drawn by the commotion. He looked weary as he dismounted. "Let's be sensible, Harper. You can't fight every man's quarrel." Samuel's voice was iron. "I'll fight this one." The Hensleys muttered threats but finally turned, dust rising from their horses' hooves. Sheriff Briggs shook his head. "You've bought yourself more than gossip now. You've bought enemies." When he left, the twins ran to Samuel, pressing close. "Don't let them take us," Julie begged, her voice shaking. Gerard clutched his sleeve, eyes fierce with fear. Samuel rested a hand on each child's shoulder. "No one's taking you." His words were steady as oak. That night, the cabin felt both safer and more fragile. Mary sat near the stove, wrapped in a quilt, her eyes on Samuel. "You didn't have to stand for us." He met her gaze. "Maybe not, but I would again." The fire popped, sparks rising like stars. Silence settled, but it was no longer empty. It was full of unspoken promises, of hearts daring to trust. Yet even as hope grew, the sickness clung. Mary's strength was not yet secure. That same night, as thunder rumbled again across the hills, she collapsed once more, fever burning her skin. The children cried out, fear twisting their young faces. Patch barked sharply, pawing at her side. Samuel lifted her, lowering her back to the cot. His jaw tightened, his silence heavy with the weight of helplessness. He had thought the worst behind them, but now the specter of loss loomed again. He sat beside her through the night, the children huddled close, the storm building outside. And as lightning lit the sky, Samuel bowed his head over Mary's trembling form, his hand clasping hers, whispering a vow only the darkness heard. The storm arrived like a beast from the horizon, rolling black across the spring sky, the kind of storm that bent trees and turned earth to mire. Lightning split the heavens. Thunder followed with a force that shook the small cabin on its stone foundation. Rain lashed the windows, running in sheets, drowning the prairie in its fury. Inside, Mary burned with fever, her skin hot, her breath shallow and ragged. Julie clung to her hand, whispering prayers in a trembling voice, while Gerard stood stiff beside her, trying to hold his fear inside, though his knuckles whitened around the stick he would not put down. Patch paced the floor, whining low, his nails clicking against the boards, unable to protect those he loved from the storm outside or the sickness within. Samuel Harper crouched at Mary's side, the lamplight carving shadows across his face. He had fought cattle stampedes, rattlesnakes, drought, and hunger, yet never had he felt so powerless. He pressed a cool cloth to her brow, watching her eyes flutter open and closed, watching her lips move in whispers too faint to catch. Each rise and fall of her chest seemed a battle she might lose before the next thunderclap. The children's pleas tore at him. "Don't let her die," Julie sobbed. "Please, sir, don't let her leave us." Gerard's silence was worse, a silence filled with fury at the world and at himself for being too small to stop it. Samuel's jaw set. He rose abruptly, striding to the door. Rain howled as he wrenched it open, water blowing in across the threshold. He pulled his coat from its peg, shouldered his rifle, and turned to the children. "Watch her. I'll bring help." Julie cried out, "But the storm!" He cut her fear short with a glance, his voice steady though his heart thundered. I'll come back. He slammed the door behind him, vanishing into the deluge. The storm fought him with every step. Mud sucked at his boots, rain blinded his eyes, the wind drove against him like a living force. He saddled his horse with fingers stiff from cold, the animal rearing at each flash of lightning. Samuel mounted, digging his heels, and they plunged into the torrent, hooves hammering against the sodden earth. The prairie became a sea of darkness, lit only by the brief, violent flare of lightning. The river, swollen and raging, stood between him and the town. Its waters clawed at the banks, frothing white. Samuel reined in, breath heaving, then urged his horse forward. They plunged into the current, water rising, pulling at them with deadly strength. The horse fought, Samuel gripping the reins, the storm screaming in his ears. For a moment, the flood nearly took them, but sheer will carried them through, sodden and gasping on the far bank. At Doc Whitlow's door, Samuel pounded with the butt of his rifle, water streaming from his hat and coat. The old doctor opened, eyes widening at the sight. "Fever's taken her. I need you now." Whitlow hesitated, glancing at the storm, but Samuel's expression left no room for refusal. In minutes, the doctor gathered his satchel, and together they rode back into the tempest. At the cabin, Julie sat rigid, her mother's hand in hers, whispering hymns. Gerard stood guard at the door with his stick as though it might keep death itself at bay. When Samuel burst in with the doctor, hope flared in the children's eyes. Whitlow knelt beside Mary, his hands swift and practiced. He mixed powders, coaxed sips of bitter tincture between her lips, placed compresses on her chest. Samuel stood close, every muscle taut, while the children hovered, their breaths shallow with fear. Hours passed in a haze of thunder and lamplight, the storm raging outside as fever raged within. At last, near dawn, Mary's breathing eased. Her fever broke like a tide receding, leaving her damp with sweat but cooler, her face less ashen. Julie gasped with relief, tears spilling. Gerard sagged against the wall, his stick slipping from his grasp. Patch whined softly, pressing his muzzle against the cot as though to assure himself it was true. Samuel sank onto the chair, exhaustion washing over him. He had not prayed in years, but the gratitude rising in him felt like one. Mary's eyes fluttered open, clearer than they had been in days. She saw him slumped beside her, his hands still clasping hers, his head bowed. Her lips parted, and her voice came weak but sure. "You didn't let go." His eyes lifted to hers, something raw and unguarded showing for the first time in years. "No, I won't." The storm eased with the dawn. Clouds broke apart, sunlight spilling across the drenched prairie. The cabin glowed golden as the rain slowed to a hush, the air thick with the scent of earth reborn. The children rushed to the doorway, marveling at the rainbow arched across the sky. Their laughter, thin and bright, carried into the room like a promise of tomorrow. Mary lay watching them, strength still fragile but her spirit unbroken. Samuel sat near, shoulders heavy with fatigue, yet in his eyes there was something new, a gentleness that had been buried deep beneath grief. She whispered, "Why? Why risk so much for us?" He looked at her, the lines of his face etched with both pain and peace. "Because kindness is all I have left to give. And maybe it's enough." Her hand trembled as it sought his, her fingers light against his rough skin. "It is more than enough," she whispered. Days turned to weeks. The prairie bloomed, wildflowers painting the fields, and Mary grew stronger. She walked to the porch with Julie's help, the fresh air filling her lungs, her eyes drinking in the world she had nearly left behind. Gerard worked with Samuel in the barn, his small hands learning the tasks of men, his trust growing like a young tree. Julie skipped barefoot through the grass, her ribbon bright in her hair, her laughter no longer fragile. Patch chased after her, his bark sharp with joy. The town still whispered, but Samuel cared little. Martha Caldwell's sharp tongue dulled in the face of what she could see, a family, fragile yet whole, pieced together by mercy. Sheriff Briggs tipped his hat when he passed. His sternness softened, though his words still carried warning. "Trouble comes when you least expect it, Harper. Guard what you've claimed." Samuel nodded, but his gaze lingered on Mary, her eyes shining in the lamplight as she mended a shirt, her children asleep beside her. Trouble might come, But so did dawn after every storm. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the fields glowed amber, Julie and Gerard pressed close to Samuel on the porch. "Will you always keep us?" Julie asked, her voice uncertain. Samuel's hand rested gently on her shoulder, then on Gerard's. "I will. So long as breath's in me, you'll never be alone." Mary stood in the doorway, the light catching her face, tears glimmering at the edges of her smile. She had thought herself cast out, unworthy of love, but here was proof that life could begin again even in its brokenness. That night, under the stars, Samuel walked to the grave where his wife lay. Wild flowers covered the mound, swaying in the breeze. He knelt, touching the earth, his voice low. "I kept my promise to you, and I'll keep it still. But I think you'd want me to keep living too." He rose, the weight of years easing from his shoulders. When he returned to the cabin, Mary was waiting at the window, her face soft with unspoken understanding. Their eyes met, no words needed. Something had shifted, something tender and real. Weeks later, the prairie sang with summer's approach. Samuel planted seeds with Gerard, guiding the boys' hands. Julie skipped among the rows, her laughter carrying like birdsong. Mary stood nearby, patch at her feet, her hands folded over her shawl. The sun bathed them in gold, and for the first time in years Samuel felt he was not a man alone but part of something living, fragile, and beautiful. As the day ended, they sat together on the porch, silence between them no longer empty but full of belonging. Mary leaned her head against the post, her voice barely above the hum of crickets. "You gave us back our life." Samuel turned, his gaze steady. "No. We gave it back to each other." The stars wheeled overhead, vast and eternal, but within the cabin's glow was something greater than all the storms the world could bring. And yet, as peaceful as the night seemed, the memory of Mary's fever lingered, the image of her near death still raw in Samuel's mind. He knew how quickly joy could be stolen, how swiftly storms could rise again. As he watched the children drift to sleep and Mary close her eyes in the lamplight, his chest tightened with both gratitude and fear. He had opened his door to strangers and found a family. But in the quiet of that spring night, he wondered if the world would ever let them keep it.